Are you wondering what path to take in life and what direction God might be calling you? Well, today we're going to talk about one of the best, if not the best place to start. We've been talking about having dreams and visions and choosing a path and heading towards something, going in a direction. But when you have multiple paths, which one is the right to take? Which one is the right one to take? How do you know which direction that you're actually heading in is the right thing? Well, one of the compass points that I've found that's been very helpful in my life has been this passage right here in Proverbs 3 verses 5 through 6. Trust in Yahweh with all your heart. Trust in I am in the eternal now with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. So, what have you gone through in your past? Look back through all of the things that you've gone through, the things that have happened to you, the decisions that you've made, the interactions you've had with people. Look back and take a real close look at those things. Where was God in all of that? Where was God's hand in some of those things? Like, if you start looking back, try to see if you can see God's fingerprints. Where was God in those? Hindsight's 20/20, and it's easier to have some perspective in some of those situations. Not certainly all of them. I'm not talking about like a gigantic, devastating situations, but in your regular, but in your average day life, where is God in all of those things? Can you acknowledge, can you find where God's fingerprints are in any of those things? So let me give you some examples. In 2014, we were at church on a Sunday morning and we got a phone call that our basement had flooded with a sewage flood, that the pipes had backed up into our little duplex that we were renting, and it was the biggest phone call of our life up to that point because we just were homeless one day and couldn't go anywhere. And fortunately, my parents' property, the church property there, had a place that they put us up in, allowed us to stay there, and it was, it just kicked off a really tough season. It was a hard thing to go through. We lost half of our stuff. You just can't move back to the place that you called home one day, and now it's no longer home because it is covered in the poo flood. It was super awful. It was a terrible season, and it was really tough on my wife and I, and there was just a lot to have to deal with and to go through. I would never tell you that this is the path that you should take. It sucked. But when I look back in that, I can see that my wife and I were getting on in a deep rut, and we were not moving forward. We were just kind of trudging along. And I'm not saying that God caused that flood. That's something to debate about for ages and ages. But I will say that he used that flood to get us up and to get us moving. And we didn't just roll down the same path that we were on already. Like he got us out of our rut, and he helped us see a whole new side of life. And that ended up moving us up to northern Colorado. And we've made a ton of community, and we have great friends, and we're rooted in a good church. Like, all of that, I would say, is a product of having been diverted very hard. Am I happy about the flood? No, that sucked. Would I ever recommend it to anybody? No. Is that a good plan for anyone's life? No, it was terrible, and I hope to never go through it again. My wife and I are very flood avoidant. because of that situation, but I can recognize where God used it and brought something great into our lives. In another situation, I was rejected by an employer. Like, it's difficult to talk about all of the things, but essentially, I felt like it was just a giant no, and they totally rejected me, and they sent me away and just didn't want me there anymore. And it felt like I was worthless and awful, and nobody wanted me, and it just was a tough season to walk through. And I again would never recommend this, but what God has worked through that so that I could come out of the other side of that better, and I see his fingerprints on it as he was kind of helping pull me away from a situation that I didn't need to be in, and it wasn't going to be good for me in the long run. See, like, I have struggled a lot with second guessing every decision I've ever made, and making a big decision to leave an employer is a huge decision to make. And this decision kind of got made for me, and that was actually God's mercy in my life, and it was it was a great thing, and it's been good. It's been some tough things to walk through, and I had to get a lot of healing, and I've worked through a lot of stuff and processed, and there were tears, and there were anger, and there's now joy, and it's okay. It's a good situation. I'm glad it went down. I'm not glad it went down that way, but I'm better for having gone through it, and I can see where God's hand helped me through that season, and he used that whole situation to help put me in a better place than I was before. Not everything is bad when you look back and you see God's fingerprints. Like, even starting this channel, like, God's fingerprints are all over this thing. I tried to start this so many times, you guys, so many times. 7 years I've been trying to get this thing going. I recorded 3 episodes for in an audio format, and then I stopped recording them and it just died away. I have probably at least 2 other times that I have almost recorded the first episode, and they were not good. Nothing was working right. Nothing was flowing well. It just was terrible. And through all of that, I know that God's fingerprints was on all of those things. And even though I felt like a failure so many times for having not even gotten started, I know that God was leading me to this point to be able to work on this podcast now versus 7 years ago when I was not in a good place. And it wouldn't have been as good. It just wouldn't have been as good. Some of you might think it still isn't good, but that's okay, because my best is still yet to come. If you don't like this episode, guess what? My best hasn't even happened yet. So just keep tuning in, because you'll get to my best episode at some point. So look through your life and really look for God's fingerprints. Don't just see the situation and what things you think you're supposed to learn from it, but look for God's hand in all of it. Where was the Spirit of God? Where was the Spirit leaving his fingerprints on your life? Because even when it seems like a really sucky situation, we know that God is always with us. Our eternal now is always with us. Where is he right now in this situation, and where are his fingerprints? And when we can start looking at those, we can really start understanding where are God's fingerprints in those stories. So I'm not saying that God has caused any of these things. I'm not saying that God has caused the situation in your life. That is a debate on the sovereignty of God and predestination and whether everything is written. And you guys know that I don't drive with the whole everything's already been written for us. I don't believe in that. I think God talks to us and works with us in every moment as if it's brand new and it's the first time we've ever decided anything. He works with us right here in the present. So I'm not saying that God caused any of these things, and I'm never going to say that. But I know that God can redeem anything. So every situation that happens, he's got his fingerprints on it as he is already working to redeem that situation. This is sort of like getting a sports team to find the game tapes from last week and watch through them. Where did this go right? Where did this go wrong? How did these things go? But we're looking for more than just, did this work? Did that not work? We're looking for God's fingerprints. Now, why is that important? Because first of all, it cultivates gratitude. When you see God's hand through the situation, it, at least for me, it helps me feel like, okay, there is something I can benefit from this sucky poo flood, as my kids deemed it back in a long time ago now. It's coming up on 10 years, which is crazy pants. It cultivates gratitude because I see that God used it for our good, and it makes me excited and seen and cared for, and I know that I am not alone because I saw God's fingerprints all over this situation. So it makes me very thankful that I have a present God who loves me and cares about me and sees me even in the middle of a flood, or being rejected by an employer, or starting a YouTube channel, that he hasn't still forgotten about me even though I'm on YouTube. As we look back and we see the repeated pattern of where his fingerprints were in our lives, that helps us look right now and see, where are his fingerprints right now? What is he involved with right now? All of your trust. Just go all in on trusting the great I am. And don't just lean on your understanding, because the metric of you and what you can comprehend is pretty small and pretty short, and not a great metric to measure things by. Because we're talking on a grand cosmic scale of all of humanity and all of time. Like, your understanding is not enough to comprehend all of these things. So don't lean on your own understanding. Don't try to just use that, but trust I am. Trust the Spirit of God who loves you and cares about you and is ever present in this moment, looking to see his fingerprints in the past so we can recognize them right here, right now. And that is what brings us to the whole thing, is that it says he will direct your path. If you're looking for where to head in the future, just like I am right now, I'm trying to figure out what direction I'm going in life, what dream and what vision I have to drive for. We're hanging out in this exact spot. What direction does God want us to go? Well, he's going to direct our paths. When we look back and acknowledge him in all of our ways, in everything that we've done and everything that we've been through and the things that have been done to us, when we can peel back and start looking and we can see God's fingerprints on those, it gets easier for us to recognize where he's leading us, what paths he wants us to take. Looking back through all of the things that you've gone through helps you recognize those patterns, and you can see them in the here and the now and know where they're leading for the future, which to me gives me a lot of hope that God hasn't abandoned me in this moment, that even though I'm in the midst of the storm and it's tough to see the other side, I know that he's here with me because I've seen those fingerprints in the past. I can see the fingerprints on it right now, and I know that he's leading me in a different direction. So if you're stuck in this place that you're like, God, which way do I need to go? Well, let's start where are his fingerprints on those paths. What path has God's fingerprints on it? Because when we recognize the fingerprints in the past and the fingerprints now, it gets easier to see what path his fingerprints are on to be heading for that in the future. And that is a huge amount of hope to me, because I can see all of the places that he's rescued us and he's used some sucky situations to really get us to the next level and find something great in our lives. So let's keep practicing and and encourage each other and point out to each other and challenge each other. Where do you see God's fingerprints? Where were God's fingerprints in this situation? And as we help encourage each other, we can see those fingerprints ever clearer and have greater hope for the future. Thank you for joining me this week. Thank you for hanging out with me for a little while. Remember, you are not alone, and welcome to the Martyr Life.